there is a big difference between what you intend to say and how it is perceived. Especially as a leader, I call it the intent perception gap, right? You intend to say something a certain way, and how somebody picks up on it is going to be very, very different.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Dev Interrupted. I'm your host, Connor Bronston, and I'm here with Shankar Ramaswamy. He is the head of engineering at DataStax and a former VP of engineering and also senior director of engineering at Google. He's had a million titles, a very storied career, and we're really honored to have him here today in the Dev Interrupted community to talk about what he's done, what he's working on at DataStax, and much more. Shankar, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Connor, for having me. Glad to be here.
Awesome. I'd love to get to know you a bit better and talk a bit about your career. I really want to dig into DataStax too, but let's give our audience a chance to get to know you. So, sure. Like I said, you've previously been a senior director of engineering at Google. Sounds like that's what you were doing going into the pandemic. You know, where you were VP of product management, and you also led the engineering team at Apogee, which was acquired by Google. You were previously a director of engineering at PayPal and of product management at eBay. You know, walk us through your career a bit. How did you get started in engineering and then make your way to where you are today as a very successful engineering leader?
Thank you. Yeah. So, I started my career in engineering quite accidentally, right?
Really?
I was not super engaged when I was in school. Most of the stuff wasn't very interesting. And then when I got to college, I happened to read my textbook in electronics, and I just fell in love with electronics and hardware and all of that stuff. So, and then continued to study and got a PhD. And at that point, I switched over to the software side of things, and so really love technology and love being in technology.
Absolutely.
And then as a technologist, the first half of my career, I got to do a little bit of, individual contribution, also did a little bit of entrepreneurial work. And then the second half of my career, I did product management for a few years, right? And that gave me a great insight into, how to think about products and the value and customers and all of that stuff. And then decided that finally I wanted to be in engineering leadership. So I've spent the last decade as an engineering leader. So the first 10 years was individual contributor, then about 5 years as a product management person and leader, and then engineering leader for the last decade. Right? So that's kind of my journey.
If I recall correctly, the product management, you were doing that as a director at eBay, right? And then you transitioned to engineering at PayPal.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So how did that transition come about? You decided you wanted to go full into engineering leadership. You already had these skills as a leader, and you said, hey, let me go do this here, or what happened there?
Yeah, so I realized that as a product manager, while I had a lot of the experience of thinking about customers and value and experience and all of those things, I felt like I could bring that thinking and be more effective on the engineering side of the house, right? Where I felt like a lot of times when I was working with my engineering partners, there wasn't that appreciation, right? And I felt like, hey, if I came into engineering and could influence the hearts and minds of engineers, right, then with product thinking and appreciation for customers and so on, that could be really powerful, right? And so that's kind of why what I've been doing over the last decade is trying to get engineers to really appreciate and develop that product thinking, and then also being a good partner for my product management colleagues, right, and enabling them better, right? So that's kind of, I felt like that could be the spot where I could make the most impact, rather than being just in product management.
It certainly seems like you're making that impact. I mean, you've worked for some massive organizations. You've helped lead teams that go to acquisitions. You're obviously doing incredible stuff at DataStax now. I'd love to know a bit about that experience of working at these major headline corporations. You were at PayPal. Then you went to Apogee and then Google. How did the experience and the culture at PayPal compare to Google? Are there like pros and cons of both? What were your thoughts?
Looking at all these large companies, I think they all tend to have, some center, right? Something that has made them successful. And so you see that, show in the way everything happens. So for example, IBM, had this long history of being a very reliable partner for enterprises, right? And so that was kind of the center was, hey, we never let our customers down. We do everything we can, to meet their needs and so on and so forth, right? So that was kind of, and every customer is special and unique, right? So that was kind of the big thinking there. Amazon was actually very customer centric, but looking at it more from large scale, right? How do you sort of scale customer centricity, right?
Gotcha.
And how do you, have millions and millions of happy customers, right? So that was very fascinating to see, and really customer obsessed. Actually, I would say people at Amazon were super customer obsessed. That's the only place I've seen where junior engineers were sort of, having arguments in the hallway about what would be the better thing for customers, right? Which I've never seen.
Amazing, yeah.
And then getting to eBay and PayPal, it was all kind of one big happy family at that point. The split had not happened. I think eBay was going through a little bit of a renovation at that point, right? They'd gone through their early success, and then they'd gone through a little bit of a downer, and lost ground to Amazon and so on. So there was a little bit of revival going on. So it was an interesting mix of cultures. I think they'd also been more like an IT shop, and then they decided they wanted to be a tech company, right? So there was some of that going on as well. So certainly it was I would say there was a transition going on at eBay when I was there. And then getting to Apogee, of course, was a startup, right? Classic, small, few hundred people, and high energy, high momentum kind of thing. And then getting to Google, it was actually interesting to see the obsession with scale, right?
Yes.
And the scale that you have at Google, you don't have, in
Google scale is different.
Yeah. Right? There's maybe 2-3 places that have that kind of scale, and so many different properties with very large scale, right? So the scale was just massive, and just that, and then the culture was really a very collaborative, very friendly kind of culture, right? People were super humble, got to meet some really, really amazing, people who've done, things that we all talk about, but you meet them in the hallway, or you meet them in a meeting, and they're like super humble, down to earth, right? Kind of people. So that was very fascinating.
That's fantastic. I'd love to dig into Apogee a bit more, because I think it sets the tone for your next steps, right? Going to Google for several years, and then now to DataStax. So Apogee, you joined, you were the VP of product management, and you led the engineering organization. How many people were you managing at that point? How big was your organization?
So I was actually, so I did 2 stints at Apogee. I did a stint, and then I went in between. I took a 5-year detour to Amazon and eBay and all that, and came back. So I was VP of product management initially. And then when I came back, I became the VP of engineering. And so I did that for about 5-6 years, right, before moving on to Google Maps. So led the thing through like a pre-IPO stage, right? So about a year and a half or so before we went IPO, and then for about a year and a half we were public, and then for a couple of years we were a little over 2 years integrating Apogee into Google. So it was actually very interesting, right? Each of those phases were, quite different, right? First, we're sort of preparing to, go be in the limelight and get to be a well-oiled machine, right? Because once you're a publicly traded company, you have to kind of be well-oiled. So that was the first phase. And then once we became public, then it was just, being consistent, delivering, right, quarter after quarter, and making sure that you don't miss, your your plans and that kind of thing. So that was pretty good. And then we got an offer to get bought. And once we got the first offer as a publicly traded company, you then have to go through like a process of shopping yourself around and getting the best offer and so on. So being part of that process was pretty fascinating for me personally. And then getting to Google. So during this period, I would say the team was, when I started, we were about 150 people or something, and then we grew all the way to about 275, 300.
Fantastic.
At the point that I left Google, right? So.
And for those who may be listening and maybe don't know what Apogee is, can you give them a bit of a breakdown of what the product was and what you were working on?
Yeah, so it was a API management product, right? So what it did was it actually sat between the consumer of the API and the provider of the API, and enforced a set of concerns, right, for both sides, right? So security concerns, things like traffic management, right, rate limits, quotas, those kinds of things. And then also did monetization, right? So if someone wanted to monetize their API, we could help them with that. We did analytics. We did a little bit of detecting, security type threats and all of that stuff. So really an API management product.
Gotcha. And you went through several stages, like you mentioned with Apogee, preparing for the IPO stage, growth, acquisition, internal at Google, and how that adjusted. What were some of the lessons you learned from those different experiences about how to be a successful engineering leader and to manage your organization?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I learned, and I was growing during that period as an engineering leader as well, because when at the point that I took on the role, I hadn't really managed a very large team, right? So and I hadn't managed something. I wasn't on the front line of delivering something as a SaaS offering and those kinds of things. So there's plenty of learnings that I went through. I would say the one thing that I learned through the years is just to not avoid difficult conversations, right? I think we all know when we need to have a hard conversation, and generally that's not something we like doing, right? Yeah. And so we tend to put it off or avoid it, right? And that always comes back and bites you, right? So you've got to, make sure that you figure out how to have the hard conversations early, right? And so really get comfortable with that, right? And get comfortable with having difficult conversations and develop your own techniques and so on, right? That's one thing. And then the second thing I would say is, just listen very carefully to your team, right? I think your job as a leader is not to actually solve every problem, but to identify the problems that need to be solved, and then figure out where the best solutions are, right? And all of those things, the problems that need to be solved are also going to come from your team. The solutions are going to come from your team, right? So your job is really to pick up all that signal, synthesize, and make sure the right things get done. So that's very important. And then another one that often we ignore is there is a big difference between what you intend to say and how it is perceived. Especially as a leader, I call it the intent perception gap, right? You intend to say something a certain way, and how somebody picks up on it is going to be very, very different. So I'll give you an example. I used to walk around the hallways and engage in conversations with folks on the team. My intent was just to connect and have a chat and have a technical brainstorm or something on a topic, right? And so my intent was to learn a bit more about what they were doing and what they're working on, but also just chime in with some ideas and things of that nature. What I didn't realize is when I would throw out an idea or throw out a proposal, they took it as a, hey, Shankar wants me to change what I'm doing and do it differently, right? And so here it is. Here's a great example of an intent perception gap, right? I'm intending something, but the way it's coming across to the people that I'm talking to is very different. right? And so that is something that you have to be very mindful of as a leader, right? Is when you say something, it is perceived very, very differently by different people. So.
We had Brendan Burns on the podcast a couple months ago. He's, Kubernetes co-founder, Microsoft CVP, leads a very large organization at Microsoft. And he talked about this same thing. He said, he had, as he, started to grow his team, to really realize the impact of that like elevator conversation of him saying, oh, that's an interesting idea. And, 3 months later, this person comes back and like, I built an MVP and I've spent all this time on it. And so it sounds like you've experienced that same stuff.
Exactly. So everything, right? And that's just one example, right? But totally. Every word you say, right, is perceived a certain way. So
there's weight to it. And I think it's really wonderful to hear that both of you are thinking about it so deeply, because the impact that we have is really important to understand. And I think that goes in line with what you said previously around listening too, because that's also kind of part and parcel with this, where if you're not listening to your team and understanding what's going on and trying to unblock them, it's really easy to not just, let intent perception gap be an issue where you may say one thing and they perceive something else, but to also like fail to understand what's going on there, which leads to even more of that gap, I'm sure.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. No, absolutely. Yeah.
I really appreciate what you said about do hard things as well, because it's such an important trait to develop. As humans, we all procrastinate sometimes and try to put things off. But the places where we learn and grow as leaders or as individuals are often like doing the hard things. So they're often the most important things to drive that growth and success.
Exactly. And
I'm curious, how has this transition to a hybrid or remote world impacted your ability to do that listening? How have you had to adapt your strategies and make sure that you're not, falling prey to the intent perception gap?
Yeah, no. Actually, that's a great question. Because actually one of the things that, we all may or may not know is a lot of our communication is actually nonverbal, right? Mm-hmm. And when you're in a physical space, the nonverbal cues are much easier to pick up, right? Because totally. you can see what's going on, body language, and so on and so forth. Even the thing that you can see in a hallway, right? That somebody who's normally very cheerful, very happy, is kind of walking around in a droopy, sulky manner, right? And something's up, right? So those are the things that I would say I miss the most, right? And so one of the things I've been trying to train myself is in Zoom meetings and things like that is to see how I can try and make up. So I try to consciously observe, what's going on with people and, their facial expressions and things of that nature to try and see if I can kind of glean what's going on, right? And try and compensate for some of that. And then also I've been checking in on people a bit more, right? Just to see how their tone is and how their response is and so on, right? So just trying to develop some coping mechanisms to continue to see how to get that. Another thing that I've been doing is having more organized, just ask me anything kind of conversations, right? Open-ended, ask me anything conversations. So my ABP is kind of set a schedule where every week I end up meeting a couple of groups for about 30 minutes. And all we're doing is just saying, hey, what's on your mind? What questions do you have? What would you like to talk about? That kind of thing, right? Just open-ended, no agenda, right? Nothing. And that's actually helped as well, right? So just trying to, figure out other mechanisms to get that signal.
I appreciate the intentionality of that. Like we had Darren Murph on for an event talking about remote work. He's, the head of remote at GitLab. And he talked a lot about that, about how, it's not that we do lose that kind of synchronicity of these like hallway conversations. You run into someone, getting a coffee, or you're walking around and you go pop your head in somewhere. And so because of that, we have to be more thoughtful about the interactions we're having. And I like that you're doing it not only in like how you evaluate and consider and like think about the interpersonal relationship of like each meeting, but also saying, hey, I need to check in more. There's definitely been, I think, a phenomenon of people saying, oh, I'm fine. I'm keeping it together. Things are all good. But we're also all dealing with things at home that maybe we aren't going to show in a casual Zoom chat, or won't come through in a Slack conversation. And without those cues that you mentioned, it's harder to do that. And you have to be much more thoughtful about how am I tracking my team health, and how am I tracking burnout? How am I making sure that everyone's getting the support they need, or the resources, or the knowledge? And I think the AMAs are probably a great way to do that too, to build trust and also exchange info.
Exactly. And then, I have partners as well, right? So, for example, I have my HR partner, right? And I tell them as well, hey, can you check in as well, right? So that way we have, multiple people checking in on others and getting signal on what's going on, right? Yeah.
I do want to really dig into DataStax and what you're doing, because I think the way you're thinking about everything is fantastic. Can you tell us a bit more about DataStax and make sure our listeners know what it is you're doing there?
Yeah. So at DataStax, we are looking to build an open data stack, right, for modern apps. And so we've been involved with Cassandra for a long time, right? And we've had a product based on Cassandra as well in the market for a while. Recently, we also started to productize Pulsar, Apache Pulsar as well. So Pulsar and Cassandra are both products that we, projects that we participate in and we productize. And then what we're looking to do is also to integrate these things, right? So if you look at modern data apps, they use a lot of different data systems and data services, right? And they're somewhat disjoint, and they have to put things together or move data around and so on and so forth. So our thinking is, can we make that simpler? Can we give developers, a access to some of the data services that they need?
How do we get a single pane view?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. How do we sort of bring it together? Single API, right? Single way of accessing things, so that they don't have to worry about a lot of these things. So.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody on the podcast. I think it was Ben Matthews, director of engineering at Stack Overflow, and he talked about, maybe someone else, to be honest. They talked about swivel chair engineering and how it's become this norm where we're going from one thing to another, one data source to this other dashboard, to inputting code here, to tracking what's happening in Jira, and all these tools on their own are really helpful, but the confluence of them all, unless it's well managed, like what you're doing with DataStax, can be really negative for the process and bog things down.
Exactly. So we're trying to see if we can, and we're also, with the world of Kubernetes and multi-cloud and all of these things, you need your data to be everywhere, right? So we are in the process of supporting that kind of distribution and providing more Kubernetes. We have a serverless database that's all based on Kubernetes now, right? So we're really trying to embrace the needs of modern applications and figure out how to solve their data problems.
So how big is your team now at DataStax?
It's about a couple of hundred people. Yeah.
And how are you organizing it? Do you have, two different organizations that you're funneling everything into? Is it like small distributed teams? How is it set up?
Yeah. So I actually believe in, I've used this framework for a long time. I have these three core principles around which I organize. They're accountability, autonomy, alignment. Right?
Okay. The three A's.
3 A's, exactly. So the idea is that everyone should know, every individual team should know what they're accountable for, right, in terms of the customer or business problems that they're solving. And then they need to have the autonomy to be able to make the decisions they think are the best decision to solve those problems, right? So you make them accountable, give them the autonomy, right? But autonomy without alignment is chaos, right? And so that's where alignment comes in. And so alignment is about ensuring that as you have all these teams autonomously going off and making decisions, that they are consistent and coherent with each other. Right? So I tend to set things up where I've got teams and individuals their charter is spelled out, right? And they say, hey, this is your charter. You go figure this out. So I spend a lot of time working with them, writing things down and really clearly spelling out the charter. And then I let them, do their thing, right? And then I focus a lot of my attention on the alignment piece, right? So setting up the charter gives them accountability, giving them the space to execute, and also, letting them know that it's okay to fail, right? It's fine. We'll just learn from failure. That gives them the autonomy to go and do what they need to do. And then I spend a lot of my time on alignment. And the way I like to think about alignment is you want low cost alignment, right? Like we could all be sitting in the same room all day and discussing everything, and we'll be perfectly aligned, but we won't get anything done. So the question is, how do you sort of have that alignment be at a low cost? And that's where I figure out what sort of processes and rhythms and information exchange and other things that we need to have to keep that going with the minimal cost for all involved.
And that high degree of ownership you're giving your teams with the autonomy, that really, I'm sure, resonates with them around feeling like they're making an impact with their work and having
Absolutely.
the opportunity to try things, as you point out, and to fail when needed.
Absolutely. And grow, right? So I also look for, how can I stretch people, give them, something that they've not done before and so on and so forth, so that they can also feel like they're developing, right? We all, at the end of the day, all of us want to, take on new challenges.
Absolutely.
We get bored with what we've been doing all the time, right?
So you mentioned processes to maintain and build this alignment. What kind of processes are you putting in place?
So, for example, we have, a set of regular heartbeat meetings, right, every week. And each of them is designed to give us alignment on something, right? So, for example, we have an all hands every week. And that all hands is to, align the broader team on what's going on, how are we doing, right? What's this team working on, that kind of thing, right? And then we have, a review of all our initiatives, right, every week to see if anything's changed, right? Hey, this thing's, now gone red. Okay, we all know it's gone red. What's the impact, right? Or this thing's, coming in, new initiative coming in, that kind of thing, right? And then we also align on the details, right? So we have everybody looking at all the PRDs and designs and mocks and all of that, so that everybody understands, like, oh, hey, this thing is getting built. So, for example, the security team can say, hey, have you thought about the security issues of this thing, right? Or the support team can say, hey, how are you going to get us, up to speed on this particular feature or whatever, right? So those kinds of things are one mechanism, right? So we have basically this regular cadence, so that everybody is all the time looking at all of this. So it takes about maybe a couple of hours a week, right? So about 5% of everyone's time. But the idea is that you're all very up to date on everything that's happening, that's material.
Are there engineering metrics you're tracking for your teams to help identify which teams, maybe need help or have blockers?
So on that particular front, I haven't really come across very good metrics that help with that kind of thing. We have looked at, in the past, I've used metrics like the turnaround time for tickets and things like that, right? So like a 80th percentile turnaround for a P1 or a P2 or a P3, just to see where that is, right? So we understand how things are going, to understand our velocity. But I do tend to use a lot of metrics around the customer experience, right? So what sort of quality are we delivering? What sort of availability and reliability are we delivering, right? Performance, things that would be material to our customers, right? So.
Yeah, we recently did research around pull requests. Context, I work for Dev Interrupted, and also our parent company, Linear B, tracks engineering metrics and tries to help better align teams. And one of the things that we found in our pull request research was that 50% of PRs are like sitting idle for half of their lifespan. And so I think there's definitely opportunities for that kind of alignment that you mentioned to help improve that velocity, because Like you're saying, like by teams understanding what's going on, hopefully they're going to align more with their coworkers. And there's a lot of ways to go about that, but we definitely see that a similar issue when there is a lack of alignment on teams and across teams, where idle time, whether it's like distraction time, when you pick something up and you go to something else, or like transition time during handoff, can definitely drive problems.
Oh, interesting. No, that's good to know. Good to know. I should certainly dig in more and learn.
Yeah, it's an interesting space. I think there's going to be, particularly with distributed work, there's been a lot more emphasis, I think, on how can we track what's going on, because as you pointed out earlier, we have less of that like day-to-day information. So I think there's an exciting space evolving now around taking that and diving deeper. And there's going to be hopefully a lot of incredible stuff coming out. I don't want to pitch us too much, but I think there's a lot of cool stuff out there.
No, that's very cool. Definitely check it out.
So I'm really curious, your teams are distributed. They're mostly working at home remotely. Are you hiring across the world? Is your team mostly in North America? Where is everyone?
Actually, we are hiring across the world. I believe we have people in about 30 different countries, right?
Wow.
So yeah, we're all over already. So I would say a lot of our folks, excuse me, are in the Americas and Europe, right? But we're slowly starting to also have a bunch of folks in APAC. We
Fantastic.
already have a team in Australia, and we're now slowly starting to hire in India, and we have some people in Singapore and other places as well. So yeah, it's just truly distributed.
So if someone was interested in working for DataStax and said, this guy sounds really smart, I like the Shankar guy, I want to go work in his org, where should they go find the DataStax career page?
There's definitely on our websites, datastax.com. You can find the career website. And then if you want to reach out to me, it's Shankar, SHANKAR .Ramaswamy, RAMASWAMY @datastax.com. Just drop me a note and I'd be more than happy to talk to you.
Fantastic. And I know we're running up on time here. I have a couple more questions. Do you mind? Are you able to go 5 minutes over? Is that okay?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So something I was really curious to hear from you, given the work DataStax is doing in cloud computing and your experience in the field, where do you see cloud computing going over the next 5-10 years as we continue to use this distributed workflow model?
I think that if you look at it, the heart of cloud computing is you're essentially taking away a lot of operational headaches, right, from folks, especially around infrastructure and other things, right? And you're freeing up more and more cycles for innovation, right? Otherwise, people were probably spending a lot of their money and time, trying to keep things up and running. Say, for example, we take a simple thing, right? Let's say you wanted some logging and metrics for observability, right? Earlier, you would go figure out how to run your own logging thing, your metrics thing, right? You probably need a few people just to keep that up and running.
Totally.
Today, you don't even think about it, right? You just go and get some SaaS offering for logging and something for metrics, and you're done, right? So what that means is now you've freed up a bunch of your budget and your bandwidth, and you can invest that in more and more innovation, right? So I think just we're going to see more and more innovation, and I think the rate and pace at which you will see things come out in the cloud is also going to keep increasing, right? Because now all that is going to show up as a service as well, right? So I think you're going to see more and more SaaS services and interesting services come up because there's so much more bandwidth available for innovation. I think there's still some challenges when it comes to the cloud around, things like cost management, security, all of those things, right? So I think seeing more perhaps integrated platforms where some of those things are taken care of, and it's very easy for you to sort of build in a way that, the cost, the security is good, all of that stuff, right, is definitely, I think, also something we'll see more of. more platforms, right? Rather than just individual primitives that you sort of stitch together. So I think that's another area. And then generally, I would say multi-cloud is, I think, going to become more and more important because honestly, if people haven't learned from the past, single vendor strategies are not that great. I know today single vendor strategies produce deep discounts and those kinds of things, but I do feel like it's somewhat irresponsible if you're all in on just one vendor, right? I think having a multi-cloud strategy is going to become important, and there's some great technology showing up there as well, right? That's starting to really, Kubernetes is, sort of foundational. Some of the work we are doing at DataStax is in that direction. So there's a lot of, very, very interesting stuff happening, and multi-cloud is going to become more and more interesting. So more of the, full, like whether for availability or for cost or whatever reasons, right? Competition, being able to shift quickly back and forth and do things would be, I think, where we would go with that.
Fantastic. So there are two more questions I want to ask that are ones we try to ask every guest. One is, what was a mistake you've made as a leader that you had to overcome, and what did you learn from it?
I think one of the mistakes that I made early on was not delegating enough, right? And I think it's one of those things, right? See, you're almost trained, you're good at problem solving, which is why you get these opportunities to lead, right? And then it's a muscle that you have, right? You have a lot of the problem solving instinct, and then you become a leader and you tend to continue in that mode, right? Where you see a problem and the first instinct is, hey, let me go solve this, right? And I think the thing that even now, right, sometimes I make that mistake, right? And I literally have to step back and say, no, should I be the one doing this, or is there somebody else that I can give this to, right? And so there's certainly things that I have to put my attention and get, into the details. But a lot of the times, either there's someone better suited to do it, right, than me, or it's a great opportunity for someone, right,
to learn, to grow,
to stretch and learn and do something different, right? So I think just that is the one thing that I would say, is a big mistake that I certainly, took me a while to realize that I shouldn't be getting into all these problems myself.
It's funny you mentioned that. So we had Hiram Wright and Titus Winters from Google. They're both senior staff engineers there on the podcast earlier in 2021. And they talked about this, but they also talked about it from the perspective of how we learn to code. So, generally you're going to a coding boot camp, you're, going to university, you're taught to solve problems on your own. And, engineers who then later become engineering leaders are taught to, like you said, be really incredible problem solvers. They're not taught to how to pull a team together, how to delegate to others, how to necessarily think in a collaborative fashion about solving problems and using those other best resources. So it can make people really incredible problem solvers, but in some ways we're often training them to not be successful leaders down the line. They have to be retrained.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, there is no formal training on people problems, right? We know how to solve technical problems, right?
Right.
But solving very large technical problems often involves a lot of people problems as well, right? And we're not, generally equipped for those kinds of things.
Which is why people hopefully listen to this podcast, so they get these great nuggets of wisdom from you. So, one last question here. In your mind, what are the keys to your success as an engineering leader?
I think one of the things that I do as an engineer is I bring a lot of systems thinking to my leadership as well. And I think that serves me well because I'm always thinking about, how do I create a system rather than, depend on just individuals, right? And so that's something that I think serves me well. And then I would say I I've generally over the years, learned how to listen more, right? And so I think that's I do more and more of that. I'm certainly not where I'd love to be, but I certainly I'm on that journey and much better. And so I think that's also serving me pretty well. And I'm also very curious, right? So I love to just learn and continue to grow myself. So I would say those are some things that have served me.
Great nuggets of wisdom, talking about DataStax, the acquisition by Google with Apogee, and the rest of your background. It's been really fantastic to get to know you here. I do like to give our guests an opportunity here to close out the conversation with a call to action. It could be talking about that hiring you mentioned earlier. It could be something else. What do you want engineering teams and leaders to take away from this conversation?
So a couple of things. One is if you're looking for a database, right, for a new app or whatever, right, do look at Astra, DataStax Astra. We're really proud of it. Our serverless database, we think, represents state-of-the-art database that would serve you well. And then if you're someone that is deeply passionate about distributed systems, cloud computing, Kubernetes, or databases, please come. We're hiring actively, and please reach out and drop me a note or visit our careers page at datastax.com, and we'd be really happy. Or connect with me on LinkedIn if you can easily find me there. I'd love to talk to you.
Fantastic. Definitely check out DataStax. And I know I'm going to go connect with Shankar. What an interesting conversation. A couple quick reminders for our listeners. One, if you haven't already rated and reviewed the show on your podcasting app of choice, particularly Apple Podcasts. I know I say it every week, or Dan does, but please do. It's really crucial to the show, getting discovered, and ensuring that others get in on these conversations. And if you haven't also joined our Discord community, you're missing out on daily conversations with other engineering leaders. It happens all week, and we're excited to ramp that up as we head into our Interact 2.0 conference on April 7th. We'll continue to give you updates in the show, but if you want all the newest information, you got to either sign up for our newsletter with now more than 2,000 people who would be on there with you, or got to join our Discord community to learn more. So hope you will. We'll have links to all this in the description below. And Shankar, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Connor. Glad to be here.